Within the deep lineage of visual art that explores challenging subject matter, the genre of artist books has long played an integral role in educating about and advocating for themes of socio-political and cultural justice topics. Book artists utilize the book form in these cases to trouble or disrupt the status quo. In some instances, the artist is also the disruptor, as in Clarissa Sly's It Wasn't Little Rock. The work describes her family's experience with racism and school integration in 1956, where she was the lead plaintiff in a school desegregation class action suit. Co-curated by Ellen Sheffield and Tia Blassingame, Troubling, Artist Books That Enlighten and Disrupt Old Ways of Being and Seeing is an exhibition of artist books that explore racial, environmental, and LGBTQIA+ justice themes. Artist books have an uncanny ability to take even the most challenging, complex, polarizing content and mix it with techniques from papermaking to paper engineering and printmaking with almost any other elements, from photography and poetry to cyanotypes and letterpress printing, in order to have a conversation with the reader-viewer. These conversations may be intimate, emotional, educational, thought-provoking, opinion-altering, and worldview expanding. Especially relevant and timely given the collective anxiety of the continuing pandemic, escalating environmental crises, and ongoing devastating effects of systemic racism, our need for engaging with difficult issues is even more urgent. To complement Troubling, the book, print, artist, scholar of color collective members were invited by Blassingame and Sheffield to contribute images of their work to the window banner, bringing together seemingly disparate voices and identities, signaling to visitors strength in community. The installation hangs proudly in the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art's Beacon Window Gallery, facing out toward the thousands of visitors arriving by ferry each day. The collaborative window piece contains images from artist books by 5 book print artist collective members. The Book, Print, Artist, Scholar of Color Collective is a group founded by Tia Blassingame in 2019 that brings Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, book artists, papermakers, curators, letterpress printers, and printmakers into conversation and collaboration with book history and print culture scholars in order to build community and support systems. Hello, it's Kristin Tollefson, the Director of Education and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Advancement at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art, welcoming you to a curator's talk with Tia Blassingame and Ellen Sheffield. First of all, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement, if you'll follow me through a thread of the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that have unfolded over generations and that continue today. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. I'd like you to consider the ways you can live values that demand and reveal truths, stand up for equity, and mitigate harm in words and actions. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather here at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art is within the Aboriginal territory of the Suquamish, people of clear salt water, the Suquamish people, who live in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's Central Salish Sea, as they have since time immemorial, thousands of years. The Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Tia Blassingame and Ellen Sheffield are co-curators of Troubling, Artist Books That Enlighten and Disrupt Old Ways of Being and Seeing, an exhibition currently on view at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art. Tia Blassingame is a book artist and printmaker exploring the intersection of race, history, and perception. Utilizing printmaking and book arts techniques, she renders racially charged images, histories for a nuanced discussion on issues of race and racism. In 2019, she founded the Book, Print, Artist, Scholar of Color Collective, which has over 40 members. Blassingame is an assistant professor of art at Scripps College, where she teaches book arts and serves as the director of Scripps College Press. Ellen Sheffield is a visual artist, writer, and teacher based in Gambier, Ohio, and Point Richmond, California. Her works on paper and artist books are grounded in collaborations with poets, experiments with found text, and working with visual scores to engage themes of place, memory, and language perception. She recently completed 14 years of teaching book arts in the Kenyon College Art Department and currently teaches virtual workshops for art centers around the country. Today, you're going to hear the curators talk about their show and about the ideas and motivations that led to the show and its trappings. So I'd like to welcome Tia Blassingame and Ellen Sheffield.
Great, thank you, Kristin. So I'm Tia Blassingame. I'm one of the curators of the Troubling exhibit with Ellen Sheffield. And what I wanted to do is start outside of the exhibition, actually outside of the museum itself, at the window display at the entry. And this is a space that we felt could kind of start the conversations that we have within the exhibit, really bring together, bringing together 5 collective members that were invited to share their artist books, prints, in this case, giving you kind of a snapshot of a piece, and in many ways bringing together different communities, languages, cultural, personal histories that might not be together in this way. But first, I'm going to talk really briefly about the collective, go through the 5 pieces to give you a fuller sense of the artwork. And then I'm going to speak briefly about one piece that's included in the exhibition. So the book print, Artist Scholar of Color Collective, a nice mouthful, you can just say book print collective. I started in 2019 with the idea of bringing together artists, practitioners, BIPOC artist practitioners. So book artists, writers, paper makers, curators, letterpress printers, and on with scholars, particularly of book history and print culture, with the aim of building community and support systems. As was mentioned, we're at this point over 40 members. And really, we're connected and grounded in our shared passion for book arts and its unique potential, particularly related to artist books as vehicles for social change and racial unity. And currently thinking about our collaborations, in many ways, the window display, I consider a collaboration, moves across media, disciplines, and kind of continues to morph as the group grows and our connections shift and deepen. So moving back to the window piece. One of the first piece I want to talk about is the work by Nadine Gonzalez, which is on the upper left, called Who Are You? And so this is a piece that is actually large panels that are 27 by 96 inches each, and contain charcoal sumi ink drawings, waxed Kozo paper, including minimal Xerox transfer text. So you can see this is within a recent exhibition that she had of this piece. So it gives you a greater sense of the scale and the dramatic nature of the work. So this piece, Who Are You, was inspired by the many caravans of people traveling from different parts of South America, Mexico, in the hopes of reaching the border and being able to cross into the United States. This piece displays 3 words that are often used in the United States or by Americans as derogatory terms for Latin migrants. You see a repetition of faces that seem to look the same. There's no real uniqueness tied to them. For the artist, that's purposeful because often the United States or the government doesn't, really strips away the identities of these individuals, and in many times criminalizing them as well. And so they start to become a number or a statistic. The next piece on the upper right by Sky Tafoya, 5:46 a.m. Is screen printed and also involves handmade paper weaving. And there's a close-up shot of that piece. And this is a piece that uses leftover handmade paper from her artist book, Olmagid, related to her grandmother and her connection to her grandmother and helping to strengthen her. And in this work, the design represents the clouds, and I'm sorry, this is continues to be Olmagid. So you can see the weaving letterpress text as well. So in 5:46 a.m., the designs and colors represent the clouds, sky, stars, uterus, labor, and childbirth, the journey and birth of her son. And I'm going to read directly from the artist. My pregnancy was healthy, but unfortunately I had an extremely challenging birth. I was in labor for over 60 hours and had to have an emergency cesarean when I was 9.5 centimeters dilated. Otis had a hard time as well. He wrapped the umbilical cord around his neck and wasn't breathing when he came earthside. 5:46 was the time when he started crying and was also the time my partner took the first photo of Otis. And this in many ways connects to experiences within childbirth, child mortality as well for many women of color. The next piece, the middle left, is by Sun Youngkang called Filtered Memories. And this is a piece that involves installation. And it represents the text from her father's diaries. And I'll just read briefly her statement on this work. 8 years after my father's death, my mother sent me his diaries, which he began to write when he was my age. I had reproduced selections from those diaries, and he has come back as a memory. So an example of bringing that connection within her family, but also discussing loss and bringing forward text and personal cultural experiences that would otherwise have been lost and probably ignored. And again, you see with a viewer within this space. The next piece, middle right, is by Luisa Broth Verasima, called #TakeCareOf. And it's a piece that has had kind of many iterations, initially created on the night of the 2016 election, coming out of the fear and concern around people within the LGBTQ plus community, how they would be affected by that presidential election, initially starting out on Sharpies, on t-shirts, creating a list almost as a direct action to name the people in a community that need to be taken care of. So again, this started with Sharpies on t-shirts, then became a screen print. To date, Lucchese has screen printed over 200 shirts, posters, banners, and this effort continues. You get to see the different iterations of that piece. And then the last work that's in the window display is by Elisa Banks, called Armoire, and it has many different components. A wooden box containing mounted photos, 2 accordion books, as well as a scroll book. And I'm just going to go and get into that. And I'm going to read directly from the artist related to this work. As a child, the opportunity to peek into my grandmother's armoire was exhilarating. Her armoire, like all closets, seemed intensely personal and off limits. A look was usually accompanied by a story that brought to life persons unknown but not forgotten. Years later, my grandmother long gone, the armoire remains a repository of memory, culture, history, and tradition. And in many ways, with this piece, she gives us a glimpse into her history as well. So on the right, pieces that appear to be quilts, to the left, the accordion book, starting with that dress, and then additional photos in the back. That quilt-like piece, in this case, a scroll book, has text which has been sewn on. So in many ways, this piece kind of bears witness and gives space for, in this case, one family's history, but for many African-American families, typically those histories are lost. And then the piece that I wanted to speak about that's in the exhibition in the section that deals with works that explore racial justice issues, cultural issues, is Knox Rocks. And this is by Jen White Johnson and Kevin Johnson Jr., the parents of Knox Rocks. It's a risograph printed zine that also includes a folding poster. And this piece, I think, for me, is beyond just being very compelling and very strong work, very visually strong, engaging, is thinking about how it's looking at racial justice issues, but also disability and autism advocacy as well. But particularly in this piece, the artists are really focused on their son's autistic joy and really breaking the stigma around autism, disability, particularly for children of color. And for them, they felt that it was very important to show his joy as a way to increase the visibility of the lives of autistic children of color, noting that it can be beautiful. And I'll just read their words. It is beautiful, luminous, and shows that being joyful shouldn't be masked. I aim to continue creating dialogue between myself and other neurodivergent families by highlighting my son's ability to experience joy. And so, images like this connecting back to, an image of the civil rights era where, he's seeing himself represented in those images, and then just expressing the extraordinary joy that he experiences in his life and also provides to his family as well. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Ellen to continue the conversation. I hope that you have a chance to visit the exhibit, but also that you'll look further into exploring the work of the artists that are presented in the window display, as well as the exhibition. Ellen, I'll stop sharing.
Great. Thank you, Tia. Hi, I'm happy to be here and to be able to talk about our troubling exhibit. I'm trying to share my screen here and get us into some of the other pieces and what we were thinking about as we were curating this exhibit. The first piece I wanted to talk about, questions that were front of mind for us when we were looking at works was, what about the works that we wanted to show, what was disruptive? How were they disrupting the status quo? And then also, what approaches did the artists use in presenting these kind of troubling issues? There are various ways that book artists can approach challenging topics that will pull in the reader as opposed to scaring them away or making them not interested in looking. And in the realm of environmental activism, this book, Radha Pandey's Deep Time, I felt was so beautiful that the idea of a tactile, image-laden, handmade paper, you're seducing the viewer with the beauty of the piece itself. And you are then presenting very troubling subject matter. This one actually is printed on, letterpress printed on kozo paper and dyed with cloves and indigo. And as you can see, the indigo is used to symbolize the rising sea levels. She plays in this piece with the ideas of erosion and sediment. And as you progress through the piece, these are loose pages, there's so much viewer interaction. You need to lift the pieces. You can see through the negative spaces, the cutout areas. Here's a close-up of the beautiful tactile nature here. So these shapes are kind of contour maps, boundaries of really some of the highest physical features on our planet, the Tibetan Plateau and the Kanza-Galya mountain range and the Andes mountain range. So it's really kind of a global kind of look at the idea of erosion and of rising sea levels. And the shapes on each sheet move slightly. So that's what creates this sense of depth. And, you know, it's two-dimensional paper, but she manages to really dig into it and make us feel that erosion. Depending on which way the book is read and the pages are flipped, something that's erosion on one side could be sediment on the other side. So the idea of luring in the viewer with beauty, with materiality, it's really a compelling piece. It sits in a very deep box, and so that you can accommodate the movement. And you can see how the indigo dye area rises on each page, symbolizing the rising sea waters. So another compelling aspect that drew me to this piece was, again, go back to the title, Deep Time, the concept of time, and the slowness of the progression. There are quite a few of these individual sheets. And it's kind of the idea, what I think of as closure. What happens in between these pages? How much time passes? And it's kind of a very gradual progression up the pages. I would call it a moment to moment progression, but in this case, each moment is like an eon of time. But what's happening, she's showing us that time is now speeding up. So what was once a glacial pace has now accelerated, and sea level and erosion is now reaching disaster levels. So let's compare this piece with another piece that I think uses color, images, beauty to, again, pull us in. Homesteading for the Urban Coyote by Sarah Nichols. And this is one of her group of what she calls informational pamphlets. And she's created a series of these about her urban neighborhood in Queens, New York, under the umbrella of this project she calls Brainwashing from Phone Towers. So you can see the interest in slightly subversive humor, as well as wanting to present historical work to commemorate her neighborhood, and to, again, pull in the reader. Who would think about coyotes being in urban areas? So it's about rewilding and the urban ecosystem. Would a coyote come to Queens? What happens when you reintroduce predators? Who are our new neighbors? Do we want lions and elephants wandering around the Midwest? And finally, she asks, why is everything described either as a utopia or a desert? So these questions are very compelling. And the format she's chosen is a pamphlet stitched piece that unfolds. So she gives herself more, as we say, real estate to present all of this text and image. And she uses linoleum cuts and letterpress prints. So even though these are pamphlets and they are done in large editions, they are inexpensive, that really helps with the kind of dissemination of her ideas about explore your neighborhood. What are the histories there? Here you see the page totally unfolded, so it becomes kind of like a map-like piece. And the imagery, the colors, all very compelling. How do you get someone to read those paragraphs of text? And she does it through this interactive, let's turn the page, let's flip it up, let's unfold it, let's refold it, and ends with, these very graphic, brightly colored linoleum prints of animals and plants in her neighborhood. So the environmental issues obviously are compelling, troubling, universal. And that's one section of our exhibition. But another section, let's just say, it's no coincidence that many of the most banned books in this country have to do with racism, sexism, discrimination against LGBTQ plus individuals and the like. So when you're thinking about banning books, it means that some students in their formative years aren't allowed to see things outside of their own experience. And this, of course, creates fear and isolation, fear of the other, whatever that may be for them. So looking at books presenting LGBTQIA plus themes, artists have a double task. They need to combat the ignorance, fear, hate, plus display with dignity and respect the complexity, diversity, humanity of individuals and communities. So how do you do this? Well, one approach, which I would call the Trojan horse approach, is to use a kind of innocuous format, something that is fun in a certain way. This Bare Bones Guide to Pronouns by Morgan Stewart is an inexpensively produced zine. It's in a playful tone to present a serious subject matter. So it's kind of a comic book style, and it disarms the viewer right away with this hand-lettered text and the talking skulls. If you're in academia, you've probably sat through many training sessions from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion that present information about gender identity, and you take copious notes and you're trying to learn all of the terms regarding gender and sexuality. Well, this artist, the zine, just kind of cuts through the chase and gives the reader this straightforward, very helpful information and directions with a very light touch, I think. Again, think about the wordplay in the title, bare bones, and the friendly skull, talking heads. So a very kind of humanizing approach to a timely, important, and sometimes threatening topic. Again, validating another's identity by taking the time and care to use the correct pronouns. And you can carry this little handy booklet with you. They have the informational edition, which is for beginners. And then I love this idea of the angry and queer edition. That's for those who are frustrated and upset about constantly being misgendered. So that kind of the more advanced edition might be more threatening to the beginner. But that fun kind of comic tone that pulls the reader in and allows them to take in some information that they might otherwise shy away from. So circling back to the idea of the banned book is the notion that not seeing oneself or one's family represented in popular culture can result again in, fear of the other. And we included this book, Mix and Match Families by Jamie Lynn Schaefer. Again, as simple production methods, digital photographs, inkjet printed, and it's designed like a children's book with the pages split to allow for the mixing and matching. Another, what I call Trojan horse book, where you would pick it up and be intrigued by the interactive nature, the pastel colors, the photographs of real people, and the fact that you can manipulate it to create various configurations of families. And as we know, the whole notion of family is extremely fluid. And this one expands a viewer's comfort level. You can create families that look like yours. You can create families that don't look like yours. You can have same-sex families, heterosexual families, intergenerational families, interracial families. Again, allowing especially younger people the chance to experience something beyond maybe their normal, what they would consider normal family unit. And that goes a long way to eliminating some of that fear of the unknown or the other. So in these two examples, it may seem like this very complex issue of gender and sexuality is expressed in very simple presentations by the artists. And I think the intent, again, is to allow people to come into this subject matter, using the artist book as an educational tool, displaying kind of disparate modes of knowledge and stories, and creating this opening, creating an opening for discussion and learning. So I feel like though these are simple and they can be cheaply produced and widely disseminated, that's such a strength, because then more people can experience them, as opposed to a one-of-a-kind book that you need to go to a special collections or a museum exhibition to see. So I'm going to stop sharing now and go back to Tia, because we wanted to talk kind of about this exhibit. Why this exhibit now? Why this exhibit now, Tia? What do you?
I mean, I think it has to be now, right? Like that, you talked about banning books, and there's such an almost all-out assault on anything that isn't considered normal, right? Which is probably most everything almost, right? You know, so, you know, as we as a country kind of deal or try to become anti-racist, then there is that huge pushback against that, right? And so what is not, what is not anti-racist? Well, it's outright racist and white supremacist. I think many people might be surprised that, that they might be considered either not white or not in some way approved of by a white supremacist, right? So if you are trans, if you are an immigrant, and so there's so many groups that suddenly might be finding themselves very actively on the outs, kind of not American, kind of under assault. And so I think to be actively against that, in many ways, you have to do what a lot of the artists in this exhibition are doing, which is be very brave and very vocal.
I'm, thinking about that, banning the books that's happening, now, and banning modes of teaching history. It's been said that words are technologies of power, and I love this idea that they're life rafts in the sea of the terrifying, miraculous, complex world. They can be earth-shattering, hilarious, and uncomfortable. And because artist books use words and images, we're like, double barrels here of ways to disrupt. And Stephen King has had many of his books banned, and he calls books our most uniquely portable magic. And that's just a regular, book. We're talking about artist books who are even more magical. And they can be dangerous tools of destruction, but the best ones break down the barriers and
absolutely. And I think,
humanize us. Yeah.
Humanize, and you talked about kind of seducing or disarming, in many ways they do, whether it's through materiality, tactility, color scheme, even when, like the bare bones guide to pronouns, that is, it's not a precious piece. It's relatively small. You might just move past it or just pick it up and put it in your pocket without even looking at it. And you get a page in, and even if you don't want to be in that conversation and put it down, like it's gotten into you, it's disrupted what you know about pronouns, even within a page, right?
Yeah. So why now? Of course, it seems more important than ever now with what's going on in the world. But what was our other question? Why us? Why are we doing this? What are we doing? Why are we obsessed with this?
I think for both of us as educators in book arts, like at college level, but also working with all types of students in workshops. But I think particularly at the college level, where students are struggling with a lot of these issues and struggling with their own identity, whether it's gender identity, cultural identity, finding their place, finding who they are. They have things that they want to say and that they want to, in many ways, trouble, right? They want to trouble the conversations and kind of the status quo, right? As they should. And, I think we both have an understanding that that book arts, artist books are this just uncanny, like incredible vehicle to try to do that, right? It gives you almost a stage and a space to have your voice heard and have a conversation, even when you're not with the piece or with the reader. And so I think that's part of why us, but I think also, beyond being educators, we're both book artists as well. And I'll stop speaking for you and speak for myself and say, like, this is very much part and parcel what I try to do in my own work. I mean, my focus is primarily on race and racism in the United States. Like that seems really, vague and very kind of like specific, but I think we all understand, or at least in 2022, should understand that race is in every aspect of life, right? And then we can say just in the United States, but even looking at the refugee crisis going on in Ukraine and hearing reports from, I think there are, something like 100,000 African students and workers living and studying in Ukraine, and the racism that they have experienced trying to leave,
Get out.
right?
Yeah.
So, we can't just say that something like race and racism are specific to the United States. It's kind of everywhere, right? And so I think for myself, I'm very interested in my own work about how to connect with the reader and explore challenging subjects, challenging histories, have a conversation, and maybe like change some hearts and minds, or at least have them carry on the conversation without me. And I think very specifically related to teaching book arts, like I'm endlessly fascinated by trying to give tools to students to have their voices heard.
Yeah, we've talked about this, that the students, and I've found this over the years, they are fearless in the subject matter that they choose to use in their artist books. Very personal, going through transitions from female to male, their issues with body image, anorexia, their struggles with depression, their suicide attempts. They make artist books about all these things. That's the inspiration for me, the fearlessness, the ability to look at these hard things, to see them as sources for not only personal expression, but for communicating and connecting with others. And really their ability to share and to be, incredibly generous with their classmates in supporting each other in making these works, and then the conversations they have about the topics that their works are about. And also, I go to a lot of poetry readings and artist talks, and I've actually, heard poets of color especially admit, oh, I'd love to write poems about flowers and clouds, but, like I'm compelled to respond to the ideas of the whole environment of racial injustice. And filmmakers, a wonderful gay filmmaker who's said they've been told to move on from films about personal identity to the bigger, more important issues of the day. So this is attempts to minimize one's lived experience and to, say this is not legitimate content for art. So what I love about the students is like, this is legitimate this is my life, and this is what my art is about, and this is how artist books can give them this vehicle that they can get in and drive. They can go in so many directions with that. So I have like tremendous respect for the artist.
So I'm going to interrupt you just because while I would agree that students are fearless, I think that it's very important to acknowledge the pushback that students, LGBTQ plus students get, students of color, particularly Black students get, whether it's in an undergraduate setting or graduate setting or in a workshop, when they are working on content around identity or working on content that makes the instructor uncomfortable or makes other folks within that setting uncomfortable. This is, I would say, across discipline, this occurs.
Well, that's
and
a really good point.
Historically. So when you talk about poets doing that, I think of the founders of Cave Canem. This is basically why they started Cave Canem, because they were getting pushback and wanted to create a space for themselves, right, to excel. So I think for me, I agree about the fearlessness, but I always focus on moving beyond that and trying
Right.
to give examples for those students when they're in those spaces where there is that pushback, whether it's just being met with silence and you're not getting the feedback that you rightly deserve as your other classmates are getting, or people are just being weird, right? And so to me, I think like this exhibition and this kind of conversation are so important, because I think we've talked about this, and I know people within the book arts field recognize this, that compared to other visual arts disciplines, the scholarship isn't there. It's not where it needs to be, right? And so when that happens, when you're a student who is facing pushback because maybe you want to create a book in Spanish, or book that's not in English, and your people are being weird, that you should be able to look to other examples, to other artists, right? Easily, not that it's a weird thing to do, right? And so I think exhibits like this kind of assist with that you're not alone, you're not in this weird silo, and you're not a weirdo because you're focused on your community, your culture, your history, whatever it is, whatever that topic is. Other people have done something similar. Right?
Yeah, I mean, beyond the bubble of my classroom, which I would try and create this safe space. You're right. What happens when they go on to graduate school and they're trying to continue that kind of work, and they have an advisor who's very uptight about any mention of sexual orientation, etc. So work embedded in personal experience. I mean, it's a huge part of the art world, but why, when it's the other who's doing that, is there the pushback? It's pretty frustrating.
I mean, it's because it makes someone uncomfortable, right? Like that's the whole point of banning a book, right? You're going to be in for a kind of a uncomfortable conversation, maybe with your child who's read this subject matter, right? It makes you uncomfortable. It's something you would rather avoid. It's challenging, your beliefs around, the world, which in many ways is what art is supposed to do. So,
yeah, and using art, there's many artists that prefer not to use their art as any sort of tool for social justice, that they keep that separate. That's fine. But others want to provide information and education in their work, and still mean it to be enlightening. And then there are others that are the truly activist works that just are right out there. They use the book as the platform for social change. So giving these examples, having this work on display, not only for students, but for other artists who may be struggling with, I want to move away from the flowers and the butterflies to do social kind of justice work. Here are some models, here are some methodologies, here are some approaches that you can look at and figure out what would work for you. So that's, I guess, have we answered our question? Why this exhibit? Why us?
I think so.
And
I think also, I think it's really important for the works to be in conversation. So like the window display, those are pieces that, to my knowledge, have probably never been together, that in many ways are extremely, many of them are extremely personal around family and personal experiences. Others kind of reach broader, but still speak to kind of a, communal traumas and pains. I think of Lucasa's piece of trying to like gather everyone together possible that potentially is going to be kind of like under assault for 4 years, or potentially 8 years, ideally only 4. but that they come together because there's so much, oftentimes when we think about these works and social justice issues, we kind of silo them in many ways. And, I think bringing them together and seeing kind of commonalities in struggle and how people are responding, how they're presenting, histories and ideas and trying to kind of break down barriers is really important.
Yeah, and the idea, being an artist, is a privilege. I feel like, I have many privileges, and with that comes responsibility. If we can kind of wrap this up, I have a quote from the writer Rue Freeman, who is an immigrant to this country. And Rue says, "There are no excuses to be made. There never have been. And this determination to address with our art and with our teaching and with our very life every single day, this world and its injustices alongside its beauty, is not something to be learned. It is something to be recognized as a privilege, for privilege itself accords us that responsibility." Any final thoughts?
Again, I just hope that people take the time to look at the work in the show, but beyond that, that they take time to maybe explore a few of the artists and some of their other works as well, and continue the conversation that we hope we've started with the exhibition. Thank you. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you both. That was really so good to hear. And I just want to make one last pitch for people who are able to come and see the work in person. As you know, that is another privilege to be able to see art in person. And artist books in particular really demand that of the people who are engaging with them. It's not the same to see it as a static image, a two-dimensional image. So thanks again, Tia and Ellen, and we'll look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks, Kristin.
Thank you.